The anime begins with Hajime Sugoroku giving us an introduction to Nanba Prison, a supposedly impregnable prison floating in a remote part of the ocean with state-of-the-art technology and elite guards recruited from around the world. Overall, it can be considered the #1 prison in the world, as no one has ever successfully managed to escape from it. However, the introduction is cut short when the emergency alarm rings because it turns out that some prisoners from Building 13 are attempting to break out. They are Inmate 11, Inmate 25, Inmate 69, and Inmate 15, also known as Uno, Nico, Rock, and Jugo. They have a knack for breaking out of every prison they've been locked up in. Hajime watches them closely from a surveillance room with Satoru Tanabata, a guard from Building 13. Meanwhile, the 4 inmates face various obstacles and traps as they try to escape. Uno uses a playing card to reveal a laser trap, which he, Rock, and Nico try to avoid, but Jugo had already disarmed the trap without informing them. This triggers another trap, causing the walls to close in on them. Thinking quickly on their feet, they manage to avoid being crushed to death by climbing up the closing walls and into an air vent, while Hajime looks on in frustration. Unfortunately for them, the air vent is being pumped with sleeping gas, so finding themselves in danger again, our group of unique convicts rapidly try to leave the vent while still conscious. Later, they encounter Yamato Gotti, the training freak deputy supervisor, in a maze trap. While Hajime is confident that the inmates will get lost and be captured, Yamato becomes lost himself, frustrating Hajime. The inmates manage to leave the maze and encounter a barrage of guards and guard dogs. Nico takes a shot for Jugo and seemingly dies in his arms, but he quickly reawakens because of his special body constitution and apparent drug immunity. As they reach the prison's exit, they faced Hajime, who easily defeated them. And they were dragged back to their cell. Sometime later, Jugo informed his friends about a girl he had seen in the visiting room, which prompted them to escape once again. However, they soon discovered that the girl was Hajime's cross-dressing younger brother. Meanwhile, Momoko Hayakushiki, the warden of Nanba Prison, arrives at the prison and demands to speak with Hajime about Cell 13, whom she describes as hardened and veteran escaped convicts. She warns strongly against Jugo, who plans to find the man with a scar on his neck, who had put shackles on him in a former prison. Believing that Nanba Prison is the last place he can look for this man, Momoko, the warden, had assigned Hajime to supervise Building 13 because she respected his ability and strength. She asked why the 4 inmates, Uno, Nico, Rock, and Jugo, have not attempted to escape like in the other prisons, but Hajime maintained silence. She asks again if there were any issues while she was away, and Hajime lies, saying everything was fine. Salmon warned Hajime to tell the truth, threatening him with consequences if he lies. But an angered Hajime grabs Salmon by the neck and warns him to watch his words. Hajime promises to provide the files on the 4 inmates later, and Momoko dismisses him. Before leaving, he comments that the 4 inmates are not diabolical but merely a bunch of punks. Momoko calls Hajime back but thinks that Hajime is cool and is happy that he called her by her last name, as she secretly has a crush on him. Hajime conducts the roll call for the 4 inmates, and Jugo is missing. Hajime hears snoring from the night duty room and discovers Jugo sleeping there. Jugo explains that he couldn't sleep due to his cellmates snoring, grinding their teeth, and laughing, so he went to the quietest place he could find. Hajime suspects that Yamato was responsible for letting Jugo into the room, but Yamato denies it, stating that he was working out. In the cafeteria, Rock enjoys his meal, and Shiro brings a cake for dessert. Later, Jugo asks about a Rubik's Cube, and Uno explains the goal of the game. Jugo solves it quickly, and Uno challenges him to solve a new puzzle. Later, Hajime returns to Momoko. After a long trip and answering 50 security questions to verify his identity, he gives Momoko the files on their infamous prisoners, as well as a quick introduction to each of them. As they briefly touch hands when handing the papers over, Momoko silently fangirls over Hajime and blushes at being touched by her crush. However, Salmon intervenes by hitting Hajime in the stomach for supposedly being rude to the warden. Nico was arrested on drug charges, and he later escaped because he hated having injections and taking medicine. But he now enjoys the tasty medicine in Nanba. Rock was arrested for starting a gang riot, and he later escaped prison because he hated the food. But now he loves the Japanese food in Nanba. Uno was arrested for gambling in underground casinos and later escaped because he had a date with a woman. But he is being docile now because he has no dates. Jugo was arrested on theft charges but easily escaped the next day. Out of the four, he can be considered the most experienced veteran in escaping prisons. Apparently, he likes to break out because it's his hobby, but Hajime thinks that for the time being, he has no desire to escape, although he is secretly the most suspicious of him since he doesn't know his motives and motivations. While the four inmates that have developed a strong friendship reminisce, an elvish man silently observes their cell and smiles creepily. Momoko is preparing for the arrival of a new infamous inmate to the prison with another record of escaping, while Satoru Tanabata approaches Hajime Sugoroku, sobbing, and complains about being continuously bullied by the inmates of Cell 13. Hajime suggests that Satoru should not resort to violence to make them obedient. However, when Satoru was bullied again during his next shift, he flees, sobbing, and begs for help once more. Hajime scolds him and advises him on how to manipulate the inmates based on their personal weaknesses, saying that if the needs of the three main troublemakers are met, then the fourth inmate, Jugo, will also be obedient. In her office, Momoko informs Hajime about the new inmate whom she wants to be placed in Cell 13 to test whether the inmates will remain quiet under his influence, given his record of captures and escapes. Hajime brings Tsukumo, the new inmate, and an apparent ninja, to the cell. They plan a jailbreaking contest for the rest of the day, shunning Satoru's offers of friendship. However, Tsukumo's attempts to attack Hajime with his ninjutsu techniques fail, and he is ultimately trapped after spreading his macabish around himself. Tsukumo is then transferred to Cell 11, and the supervisors discuss the New Year's celebration tournament. The inmates in Cell 13 discuss the events of the previous year and decide to break out to mark the start of the new year. Meanwhile, Momoko abuses her power as the warden to sign up Cell 13 from Building 13 into the tournament, while the convicts in question prepare to do a New Year's jailbreak. Momoko makes the announcement that the traditional New Year's tournament at Nanba prison has begun. Meanwhile, the inmates look on in wonder at this beautiful warden. The four prisoners of Cell 13 are initially surprised but become keen and energetic to participate after learning that the winners of the tournament get an item of their choosing. Hajime is approached by Salmon in an attempt to taunt him, as he believes that Hajime has already lost the competition due to the inmates he's participating with. This leads to an argument among the four supervisors, Kiji, Kenshiru, Salmon, and Hajime. While Rock, Nico, and Jugo observe the supervisors' colorful personalities, Mitsuru Hideko announces the rules of the tournament. The first event is a calligraphy competition, in which Jugo fails due to his inability to write. Yamato and Hajime win the competition with their beautiful handwriting, securing the first win for Cell 13. The second event is a mix between Machi Pounding and Daruma Drop, where one guard and one inmate must finish beating their Machi without letting their Daruma be knocked over and their bowl fall on the ground. Rock and Yamato are chosen due to their strength and stamina. However, Liang, a former cellmate of Rock's from Building 5, participates as well, seeking revenge against Rock after being previously defeated by him. He disarms Rock and mocks him for being greedy and cowardly. Rock becomes angry and fights back, ultimately knocking out Liang with a single punch. Yamato, seeing the result of the fight, becomes inspired and adopts a more aggressive approach and defeats Inori with one punch as well, securing a victory for himself and Rock. Building 13 is declared the current leader of the tournament, and the next event is a game of Hyakunin and Isshu. Satoru and Uno are nominated to represent Cell 13 in the game against Supervisor Kiji and inmates Trois and Honey. When the game begins, Satoru surprisingly instantly wins each round, taking every card and leaving Supervisor Kiji dumbfounded at how quickly he lost the round. Meanwhile, Uno struggles and can't manage to win even one card while Honey taunts him. Trois then switches places with Honey and continues trying to taunt Uno, thinking he can only cheat to win games. Uno surprises Trois by winning some cards despite being behind in the game. Honey tries to take his place but loses as well, and Uno reveals that he actually read Honey's body language to figure out which card he was going to pick. Honey accuses Uno of cheating, causing Trois to trade places with him to avoid any further conflict. However, Uno manages to take the cards from Trois as well by also reading his body language and noticing his habits. Meanwhile, Nico encounters someone who appears to be floating while retrieving his medicine. He panics and runs back to the others, leaving his medicine behind. Uno continues to dominate the game, as he can now predict every move or action made by Trois, leading to Uno winning the game. Now back at the arena, the announcer Mitsuru announces the rules for the third event of the New Year's tournament, a Beyblade-style top-spinning battle, except with supersized spinning tops. The teams are introduced, Supervisor Salmon and inmates Yupa and Kai enter the arena for one team. Nico then recognizes Yupa as the person he saw floating. He tries to show the inmate to Hajime, pulling him into the arena. This leads the announcer to assume Hajime and Nico are the ones participating, leaving Hajime with no choice but to do so. The match begins with Salmon ordering Yupa and Kai to attack Hajime, but Nico prevents them from doing so. Yupa wants him and Kai to quickly defeat Nico, but Kai abandons the match as he's not the fighting type and would rather take a nap. Yupa then attacks Nico, and Nico begs him to teach him how to float. Yupa insists that Nico is too weak to be taught his Kigong and attacks him again. Salmon and Hajime engage in battle, while Momoko watches from the stands. Hajime tries to refuse to fight Salmon and goes after the spinning top instead. Yupa aims a powerful Kigong attack at Hajime, looking suspiciously like the Kamehameha, but this excites Nico even more. He begs Yupa to teach him and attacks, perfectly mimicking Liang's movements from his previous fight with Rock. Jugo, Rock, and Uno discuss how easily influenced Nico is, and Kai suggests that he makes Nico his disciple. Yupa reveals that his request was going to be a disciple for him to teach. Nico reveals that he wants a video game console. Yupa mocks him and attacks him again, but agrees to consider becoming his master if he beats him. Salmon continues to fight Hajime, accusing him of lying to Momoko about his inmates. However, Hajime is unfazed and defeats Salmon by throwing the giant spinning top at him. Yupa attacks Nico again, but Nico copies his technique and defeats him, winning the round for Building 13. At the same time, the winner of the battle against Kiji and Kenshiro is decided with Kenshiro as the victor, which means that the last round will be Building 13 against Building 4. Mitsuru enters Momoko's office and playfully teases her before they both head back to the arena to discuss the progress of Buildings 4 and 13 in the final round. Momoko predicts that their match will showcase the power of the guards to the inmates, which leads to more teasing from Mitsuru. In another part of the prison, Salmon and Inori discuss their losses against Building 13, with Inori mentioning the homemade medicine he received from Kai to heal quickly. Salmon reminds him that Kai's actions resulted in his imprisonment. Salmon also reveals that Kai used a numbing agent against Hajime and Nico in their match, but it didn't work on them. Meanwhile, Hajime complains about being tired in a separate part of the prison. Back in the arena, Mitsuru announces the final match between Buildings 4 and 13. Momoko explains the rules of the upcoming event, a sake barrel opening contest. Jugo's cellmates volunteer him to participate, while Kenshiro expresses his desire to fight Hajime. After some back and forth, the match begins, with Kenshiro fighting Hajime and Musashi targeting Jugo. Musashi proves to be too powerful for Jugo, while Hajime and Kenshiro battle it out using a variety of weapons. Musashi demands Jugo's shackles and initiates a spontaneous human combustion technique, revealing his control over fire. Jugo, fueled by his desire for answers, transforms his arms into blades and attacks Musashi. However, Mitsuru suggests switching the focus away from the tournament and towards what has been happening outside it. This suggestion annoys Nico, Uno, and Rock. Meanwhile, in the prison, Yamato takes Tsukumo to the visiting room to meet someone who has come to see him. Tsukumo is surprised but becomes antagonistic when he recognizes the visitor, Hattori Hanzu. Hattori persuades Tsukumo to stay and praises him for his dedication as an actor. Tsukumo asks Hattori how he found him, and Hattori reveals that he pretended Tsukumo had gone missing and now believes he will become more popular when he returns. Tsukumo refuses to return, and they begin to argue. Jugo overhears them while attempting another escape. Tsukumo reveals that he learned the truth and accuses Hattori and his co-workers of kidnapping and lying to him. Hattori doesn't reveal anything but instead reprimanding Tsukumo for insulting his own mom. But Tsukumo admits that he knew she wasn't his real mother in the first place. In a flashback, a movie director looking for a real shinobi to star in her film discovers a young Tsukumo training with Makabishi. She convinces him to let her be his real mother and promises to make him a shinobi warrior. Years later, Tsukumo has become a famous child actor under the director's guidance, but he feels he doesn't know who he really is. He eventually runs away and ends up in prison. Jugo tells Tsukumo that his work is admirable and encourages him to be himself. During the New Year's tournament, Jugo attacks Musashi with his blades, causing destruction in the stands and panic among the crowd. Mitsuru orders the inmates to evacuate and stops all camera and audio footage. Uno, Nico, and Rock survive the blast with Yamato's assistance. Jugo continues to attack Musashi, who retaliates with his flames. Momoko orders Kenshiro and Hajime to capture the inmates for interrogation. Musashi attacks them with fire, creating a ring of fire to keep the guards away. Musashi and Jugo continue their battle. Meanwhile, Kenshiro tries to separate them. Salmon and Kiji diminish Musashi's fire, and he is ultimately captured. Hajime faces Jugo, but Uno, Rock, and Nico intervene. Jugo turns on his friends and is ultimately beaten half to death by Hajime. Later, Hajime is berated by his fellow supervisors for his actions, but still, he secured a win for Building 13 at the end of the tournament. Mitsuru gives Hajime the letter which suspends him for 3 days, and Momoko regrets having to punish him. After his 3-day suspension, Hajime returns to Nanba and is informed by Satoru that Cell 13 was calm during his absence. He meets Kenshiro on his way to see Jugo, who tells him that Musashi is being held in an underground cell in Building 4, and won't speak until he sees Jugo. Hajime is given a walkie-talkie to allow Jugo and Musashi to communicate. Hajime visits Jugo, who is conscious but in a depressed state and lacks the motivation to release himself from his chains. Hajime helps Jugo communicate with Musashi, who reveals that he is searching for the man with the scar and asks Jugo if he knows anything about him. Musashi reveals that he needs Jugo's shackles to kill the scarred guard. He explains that the scarred guard had augmented his powers, allowing him to fully control the flame, which made him feel like a monster. Musashi tried to attack the guard with his fire but was unsuccessful. Jugo is shocked to learn that there are 2 sets of his shackles. Hajime says that Jugo is empty as he has no desire or motivation for anything. Jugo admits that he didn't want or enjoy anything even as a child and only felt a sense of purpose when he received his shackles. He confesses to being envious of his cellmates for having wants and desires. Hajime offers Jugo the chance to choose his prize for winning the New Year's tournament, but he struggles to think of anything. Hajime throws him his cracked ID number plate, allowing him to return to Cell 13. Jugo breaks his chains and takes the number plate, vowing to face his problems head-on. At the beginning of Hajime's suspension, Kenshiro informs the inmates of Cell 13 that he will be taking over as supervisor. Momoko had previously instructed Kenshiro, Kiji, and Salmon to take turns supervising the building to minimize any risks during Hajime's suspension. Kenshiro takes Nico for a medical exam, but he becomes annoyed when Uno and Rock tag along. However, Kenshiro then reveals that Jugo is in the intensive medical ward in headquarters, and not actually in the infirmary. In the infirmary, Troes and Honey are receiving treatment for minor injuries from the tournament on Kiji's orders. Head Dr. Akina wants to examine Nico for any effects from the tournament before prescribing medication because he can mimic the moves of those around him, which can harm his body. Meanwhile, Uno and Rock search for Nico's medicine and eventually find Kagu 8 with it. The boys surround Kagu 8, and some behave in a highly inappropriate manner, much to Kenshiro's disgust. Hajime continues to work despite his suspension, and Hitoshi is concerned about him. On the second day, Kiji tries to distract the inmates from their sadness about Jugo's absence by teaching them about the prison's layout. However, an argument breaks out about who is the most handsome, and Satoru fails to break it up. On the third day, Satoru escorts Salmon to Cell 13 to investigate Hajime's honesty. Salmon loses his temper when he finds the inmates still in bed, and Yamato charges in, causing the inmates to flee and hide. Salmon eventually finds them, and they reluctantly participate in Yamato's training with the help of Tsukumo. Meanwhile, Hajime volunteers at a construction site to avoid boredom. Eventually, Hajime brings Jugo back to Cell 13 and explains that Musashi likely wants Jugo to fight the man with the scar. Hajime apologizes for his past actions, and Jugo forgives him. Momoko muses over how to greet Hajime when he returns, and Mitsuru teases her until she knocks him unconscious, causing Hajime to flee in intimidation. While sleeping, Rock has a nightmare about his past, and we get a flashback of the first time he was arrested. After getting in a fight with his father, he storms out and gets in a street fight, which he easily wins but gets arrested in the process. Despising the food at that prison, he rebels and supposedly escapes prison for the first time. He wakes up in a cold sweat, and Jugo questions if he's alright, but Rock tells Jugo he's fine as he'll receive his wish today, the stone oven he wanted all this time. Meanwhile, in Building 5, Liang's training is interrupted when the guard Inori comes and informs him that Rock requested his presence in Building 13. Although confused, he agrees to come and see what the fuss is all about. Now in the Building 13's canteen, Rock offers Liang the first slice of the first pizza ever made with the legendary stone oven. He refuses at first, but Jugo tells him to try it at least, which he then does and can't help but agree how good the pizza actually is. Shiro the chef then hands him some peach buns he made. As they all enjoy the delicious food, Rock says how he prefers food over fighting, since he only makes enemies when fighting, while eating always makes him feel satisfied and happy. Hearing this, Liang apologizes to Rock for calling his dream ridiculous. Amused, Jugo comments on how much Rock calmed down since they first met. Rock can't help but agree, stating how a part of it is because of the delicious food he gets to eat every day, but the other reason is that he met Jugo. We now get another flashback to when Rock first met Jugo. After Rock was beaten and starved by the guards for not following orders, Jugo offers him some bread. Seeing how Rock refuses to eat the plain bread, Jugo decided to break out and get Rock some burgers from a fast food joint. Back in the present, Rock thanks Jugo for helping him change and not be the indiscriminate loaded rifle he used to be. Jugo is slightly confused since he doesn't remember doing anything special, but he's then teased by Rock saying it's not something he'd remember. Uno then asks Shiro for some peach buns for Nico, and now we switch to him after his medical exam. While on the hospital bed, Nico can't help but feel lonely and depressed, especially after all the trauma he experienced in the past in similar rooms. Dr. Akina and his android helper Kaguya assure him that they'll soon be done and he'll be able to leave. Soon enough, Uno, Jugo, and Rock visit him and bring along the snacks Shiro made for him. Akina tells the inmates not to get Nico too worked up since he still has to recover, making Uno remark that the doc is grumpier than usual. Rock even comments that having an unhappy wife means having an unhappy life, and Doc Akina actually agrees that his wife has been nastier than usual. But before he can finish his sentence, his wife, head scientist Kazari, demolishes a wall with a rocket launcher, saying that she can show him what nasty really means. Soon enough, the two start arguing. Uno intervenes, telling Kaguya to say the line they practice together. Kaguya then does just that, and the two settle their argument, since they agree not to fight in front of their daughter. Kazari then informs Nico that his prize for winning the tournament, the game console, is ready. They then move to a trial room where they can all try out the games available on the game console. Inmate Kai was then brought to the arcade room at Nico's request so they can play games together as master and pupil. Kai refuses at first, but after being challenged he agrees to play at a claw machine, winning a plushie in the process. Kazari returns with Nico's super advanced and compact console that can play any game ever made. We then have a flashback to when Jugo and Nico first met after breaking out together, and Jugo introduced him to manga. Nico then thanks Jugo for relighting his will to live. Although slightly embarrassed, Jugo asks Nico to teach him to play video games, to which Nico instantly agrees. While playing, Uno spots Musashi with Kenshiro. He then calls out to the man grabbing everyone's attention, and insists he uses his common sense to apologize to Jugo. After Musashi apologizes sincerely, Uno invites him to the game room he won as his prize. Although happy to be invited, Musashi knows that he's not able to go. However, Kenshiro agrees to let Musashi go on the condition that he reveals more about his past. Musashi agrees to reveal his past to Kenshiro in exchange for spending time with the other inmates. Musashi recalls that when he was born, even as a baby, he had a higher body temperature than normal, which made him believe that he was special since his mother told him that he had the warmth of the sun. Unfortunately, it wasn't long since the heat became too much for child Musashi to handle, causing him tremendous pain as his whole body was burning alive. Every night he was also suffering from chronic nightmares of him literally lighting up in flames. One day while at school, his whole body flared up and he actually started to burn his entire body, suffering from severe burns. The doctor who treated him revealed the phenomenon as spontaneous human combustion, noting how even his survival is a miracle. Soon, he was bullied and excluded by his classmates because of his condition. Later, he was accused of causing arson in college, and when his house burned down and his parents were killed in the fire, Elf, who had disguised himself as a student, blamed him, calling him an arsonist. While struggling against the officers wanting to arrest him, Musashi burst into flames once more, automatically taking the blame for the crime he didn't commit, which eventually led to his arrest and imprisonment. While in a prison in Germany, he ends up meeting the man with the neck scar, who was the one responsible for transforming him into the monster he is now. The man offered to cure him of his condition, but instead, he deceived Musashi, amplifying his condition and giving him the ability to control flames, just so he could advance his research, at the cost of Musashi's sanity and torture. When he confronted the scarred man and Elf, he was told that he should be grateful for having given him so much power, and making him superior to all humanity. In a fit of rage for having been taken advantage of, he attacks the duo, but surprisingly the scarred man uses a sword arm just like Jugo and easily repels his attack. The man then says that after gathering all the data he needed, he became useless to him, so he attacks, cutting his face and giving him the permanent scar he now has on his face. Musashi says that although the story is true, he has no way of proving it since no evidence remains, so no one ever believed him. However, although agreeing that his story seems far-fetched and made up, Kenshiro believes Musashi after seeing his and Jugo's power as well as having heard of inmates being used for human experiments. We find out he was investigating these claims all along, and while he was unable to convince anyone that the claims are true, he continued to submit reports. But his superiors kept rejecting his findings, so he realized that something shady was at play, but he promises to expose the culprits. Meanwhile, Uno invites the inmates from Building 3 to his game room. But since he didn't finish furnishing it, he reveals that he actually wants everyone to contribute and make the room together since he wants to ensure that everyone will enjoy his game room. Hajime, Seitaro, and Yamato arrive with the furniture Uno ordered, and soon enough the rest of the inmates arrive as well, and the rest of the items are brought. After Musashi appears as well, they start furnishing the room together and playing. Shortly later, Hajime tells them they only have 1 hour of free time, and it's now time to return to their cells. Although they initially rebel, after a quick beating, they obediently return to their cells. At night, Jugo can't sleep, so Uno joins him, and they discuss today's events, and Uno encourages Jugo to enjoy his life in jail despite his many flaws, which he ensures Jugo is aware of. Still, he ends by saying that they still have a lot to learn together, and they should take it slow and enjoy life one day at a time. Jugo then leaves the cell to take a breath of fresh air on the roof of Building 13. While admiring the night sky and reflecting on Uno's words on the roof of Building 13, Jugo meets the creepy elf. Jugo. He taunts Jugo, telling him to make him laugh. Jugo is confused and scared by Elf's appearance, not recognizing him. Jugo turns in anger, but Elf seemingly teleports up on a water tank. Amused, Elf says that they used to play all the time in the past. While Jugo tries to think about who Elf is and how he got here, Elf teleports in front of Jugo again and then seemingly stabs him. However, as Jugo steps back in panic, trying to put pressure on his wound and stop the bleeding, it turns out to be some kind of illusion and Jugo finds no injury. Elf keeps teleporting around, and he asks Jugo if he remembers the man that risked everything to free and protect him. Jugo is still confused and can't recall the events Elf is talking about, so he lashes out in anger, telling Elf to stop beating around the bush and tell him who he's talking about. Elf continues his taunting, not revealing who this supposed savior is. Elf continues by stating that they gave Jugo some amazing things, but he has to actually use the weapons for them to gather more data. He then asks Jugo various questions about his sword shackles, referring to him as Specimen 15. Annoyed, Jugo curses at Elf, saying he refuses to hurt people with the weapons they forced onto him. Having revealed his connection with the scarred man, Jugo tells Elf to point him toward his sworn enemy, or Scram. Without saying anything, Elf dashes to Jugo and instantly pins him to the ground, sticking a knife through his hand and telling him to shut his mouth and not insult his master. While Elf goes off about how he should have killed him back then, Jugo has a flashback with a memory he had hidden deep in his mind. He remembers the time when a man gave his life to help him break out and told him to find happiness and never be caught again. Elf states that how he hates seeing Jugo happy to the point where he's willing to kill everyone around him. Still, he says his mission is to retrieve his brain and doesn't need the rest of his body. But he also doesn't want to bring his whole head with him. So, with a marker, he draws a dotted line on Jugo's face horizontally, threatening to cut across the line and take his brain. As Jugo struggles desperately to escape, Elf takes out a bone saw and attempts to saw Jugo's head in half. Driven to the breaking point, Jugo unleashes his sword arm, but this time manages to control his power and only uses one arm, shattering Elf's weapon and managing to break free from his restraints. As Jugo checks his wounds, it turns out all the harm Jugo received was an illusion again. Still, he can't believe what's happening, since he felt all of the injuries he received. Having gathered the data he needed, Elf says it's time for him to go, but he tells Jugo to use his blades more often since they want to see what he's capable of. Jugo then asks what their plan with him and Musashi is, but Elf refutes, saying he doesn't know of any specimen going by Musashi. Still, before leaving, Elf tells Jugo that he's also here to take another body, and he threatens to use Jugo's friends as lab rats. He then proceeds to jump off the roof, saying he'll visit Jugo again. After this encounter, Jugo can't help but be afraid for the friends he made, and for them to suffer at the scarred man's hands. The next day, Rock notices how Jugo is acting strange, not having said a single word, but Jugo assures them that he's alright. At night, determined to avoid putting Uno, Nico, and Rock in danger, Jugo decides to escape from Nanba once and for all. As he stands up to leave, the trio wakes up, too excited to break out for fun together again. Soon enough, the prison alarm rings and Nanba goes into lockdown again. Having made it to the final door, Jugo easily opens it, and they meet Hajime waiting for them outside the gates. Jugo is determined to leave and not risk putting his friends in danger, so he steps out and touches a hidden button, locking Uno, Nico, and Rock inside while he faces Hajime alone. Shocked by his action, the trio questions him, but Jugo casually says his goodbye. Luckily, Hajime won't allow his escape and soon they start fighting seriously. Jugo releases his blade arms, while Hajime fights back just as fiercely, with neither backing down nor holding back. Before the battle reaches a tragic conclusion, Seitaro arrives and unlocks the gate, after which Uno and Rock step between Hajime and Jugo and manage to stop them from fighting. They then restrain Jugo, telling him they've made many promises together which they have to keep, and they return to their cell. Jugo accepts that his home is in prison next to his unique friends as he promises to protect them and not run away. With that, Season 1 has ended. Let us know what your thoughts are. I'm out.